Have you ever poured your whole heart into a meal, only to learn the people you cooked for were never really hungry for you? Have you ever laid out knives and forks like small promises, only to watch the promises grow cold? Life taught me this the hard way. Love left waiting on a table will turn to ice faster than any dish. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Love, truly thank you. Stories are lighter when someone else helps you carry them. If it's easy for you, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Dawn peeking over your windowsill, or a late night hush where even the kettle tries not to whistle. I'm Eleanor Hughes, and this is about a Sunday in England, when the roast went cold, and a colder truth sat across from me at the table. It was the kind of morning our village gets right before proper spring gray, like a school blazer, brightening at the seams. The high street had a faint shine from last night's drizzle, shop awnings shaking off beads of water like dogs after a bath. You could smell damp stone and fresh bread if the wind came just so from the bakery near the war memorial. I'd been up since 7:30, hairpinned, apron tied, sensible shoes on. There is a rhythm to a Sunday roast that you learn in your bones. You don't so much make it as keep time with it. I put the kettle on first. That's law in this house. While it groaned toward the boil, I reached for my old roasting tin, the heavy one that's older than my Richard and stubborn as a buscue. I rubbed the beef with mustard, salt, and cracked pepper, tucked rosemary and a bay leaf into its side like a secret, and pressed slivers of garlic into small pockets along the fat cap. The oven door sighed when I opened it, warm breath on a cool morning, and the tin went in as if it knew the way. There you are, love, I told the joint, the same way I used to tell Richard when he'd finally fall asleep as a baby after an evening of colic. There you are. That's better. Parsnips, carrots, and potatoes were next, peeled, cut, parboiled, edges roughed with the colander's rattle so they'd catch in the hot oil and crisp like they should. The goose fat jar my winter gold clinked softly on the counter. In went the potatoes, a quiet hiss full of promise. 2 tins for Yorkshire puddings waited like empty theaters. I whisked eggs and milk into flour until the batter shone, gave it a proud little rest, and set the timer in my head. Timing, do you see, is a kind of love. It's noticing. It's not letting anything feel forgotten. On the sideboard I laid a cloth that once belonged to my mother, white with a blue hem like a seaside horizon. I polished the gravy boat until it held a wobbly reflection of my own face. The good cutlery came out, the one with a tiny nick on one spoon, from the time Richard banged it against the radiator pretending it was a drum. I set 4 places, first my son, his wife, the 2 little ones, then hesitated. Habit kicked in, and I set a 5th for myself. Though I've had years where I ate at the counter while refilling everyone else's plate. Old habits, well, they're like ivy. They climb back in while you're not looking. Do you know how quiet a house can seem when it's expecting? Every tick of the mantel clock feels like a footstep that stops before the door. The daffodils I'd picked opened their trumpets wider, yellow and brave. The radio, low in the kitchen, sent voices drifting through the hall. Traffic on the M25, the score from the footy yesterday. An interview with a woman who'd had a late-in-life crack at university and called it the best thing since sliced bread. I smiled to myself and thought, good for you, love. And then I glanced at the time again. Silly thing that I am. It was only 11. Too early to fret. I basted the joint, listening to the spoon tap against the tin little pewter bells. Fat shimmered, rosemary breathed out that green, resinous sigh, and the heat wrapped round my cheeks like a winter scarf. I'm not precious about much, but a gravy deserves respect. Onions slowly sweated till sweet, a spoon of flour, a splash from the bottom of the roasting tin, then beef stock, red wine, and thyme. Stir, 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 and don't walk off unless your house is on fire. Even then, take the pan with you. While the stock reduced, I crossed to the sitting room and drew back the curtains. The lane outside is cobbled on the bend, and you can feel the rattle in your bones when a lorry crawls past. Across the way, Mrs. Hart clipped pegs to a wash of shirts that snapped like sails. She caught my eye and raised a hand, and I raised mine back. I thought of the last time the whole family had been here on a Sunday Christmas, with James building a fort out of sofa cushions and Olivia trying to teach me some dance from her phone. I danced like a garden gnome and she laughed so hard I thought she'd split. Clara smiled that day too, though she watched it all like a judge giving points. I told myself not to be unkind. She's a modern girl with sharp tastes and stronger opinions, but the way she rearranged my serving dishes to be more minimal, well, it was my table. There's English, and then there's English. I was raised on roast dinners and ration book thrift. When my mother said, "We'll make do," what she meant was, "We'll make it beautiful anyway." Dad came home from the yard smelling of diesel and salt, and Sundays were his only day to let his shoulders drop. I learned early that if you can get a roast crisp on the outside and tender within, people think the world is a kinder place than it is. If you can get the gravy glossy, they will forgive you anything. I took down the old photo of Richard at Six Gappy Grin, school tie askew, holding up a paper crown he'd made at the fete. He'd wanted extra gravy back then and had called it the Brown River, spooning it over everything like a flood. I thought of the years it was just the two of us after his father died, me doing mornings at the chemist and evenings cleaning at the primary school, packing lunches by torchlight when the kitchen light went on the blink. We lived in a little terrace, then with a yard that could fit 3 paving stones and a saucer of seed for the sparrow. If I had £1 for every time I said, "We'll be all right," I'd have bought him a house outright. Instead, I bought time with second-hand coats and stews that stretched out. The timer in my head chimed. I slid the trays out and tipped the parsnips to catch a deeper edge. The Yorkshire's tins went in to preheat. Must be smoking hot, or you may as well call them failed pancakes. I topped up the gravy with a spoon of jam. Don't tell anyone, it's my trick. On the window ledge, the condensation drew a soft veil over the world outside, and I wiped it clear with my sleeve, making a small round porthole as if my kitchen were a ship. 11:45, then 5:02, then noon. Not late yet. Church let out and bells drifted like ribbons down the lane. The first Yorkshire batter hissed as it met the tin, then the second. Little sunken moons about to rise. I set out the apple crumble to rest, the custard in a saucepan waiting for later. For a second, a silly, lovely second, I heard footsteps that weren't there. Richard's long stride, the tap-tap of Clara's boots, the scatter of children. The front gate clicked. I held my breath, and a cat slithered through instead. All shoulder blades and arrogance. I laughed at myself and returned to the roast. At 12:30, I set the table fully, adjusted knives so their blades faced inward, aligned the wine glasses so they caught the light like something precious. I put Olivia's place card with the little heart she'd drawn last time. I put James's napkin in a loose knot the way he likes. I put a tiny vase with 2 primroses in the center, and for a second it looked so pretty I nearly cried. My mother would have said, "Don't be daft," and cuffed me gently. I wiped my eyes with the edge of my apron and sniffed a laugh back down. "Pull yourself together, Ellie," I told myself. "They'll be here any minute, and won't you look a sight if you've gone all blotchy." 1:45, the roast came out to rest, tented in foil like a soldier under a blanket. The potatoes sang as they crisped, little crackles popping like applause. I opened the back door to let the heat breathe, and a thin breeze stumbled in carrying the far-off hum of the road. In the distance, a Bristol blue sky tried to happen, and then changed its mind. England does that, promises sunshine, gives you tea weather. I checked my phone, not something I fuss with, much, just to see if a message had slipped by. Nothing. No, on our way. No, running late. No, save us extra. Puds. I set it down face up on the sideboard. More for company than information. Funny how even a quiet phone feels like someone else in the room. When the Yorkshires when they rose it, felt like a small miracle. Golden cliffs, hollow hearts, edges so crisp they whispered when you touched them. I floated them to the oven's cool shelf to keep their shape from sulking, and warmed the plates. The gravy had gone right silk rather than sludge, and I tasted it with a clean spoon. "Yes," I said aloud to nobody, "that'll do nicely." It was 1:05 when the first shadow moved across my hope. Nothing grand, just the kind of thought that ambles in and kicks its shoes off without asking. Perhaps there'll be 20 minutes. Perhaps Clara can't find James's other trainer. Perhaps Olivia's plate went to war with the hairbrush. I fetched the butter to soften and put the peas on fussy little divas of the veg world. They are, blink and they sulk. I laid the carving knife on its board and ran the steel along its edge until the sound felt like a promise kept. I thought of the last time Clara came alone to drop the children because a friend's brunch had run over. She'd stood just inside the door as if the threshold were a border checkpoint and said, in that bright way some people have when they're almost not speaking to you at all, "Lovely, Eleanor. But do you mind not giving them too much sugar? We're trying something new, no refined carbs." After 2, I smiled politely at the woman telling me not to feed my grandchildren crumble in my own house. Later, when she'd gone, Olivia and I made fairy cakes with sprinkles and ate them leaning over the sink, giggling. "Don't tell Mum," she said, smug with conspiracy. I'd felt wicked and 15 again. A crime, equal parts, sugar and love. 1:30. I lifted the foil and watched steam drift from the joint, tender and perfect. If food has a soul, beef has a baritone. Oh, you beauty, I murmured, slicing the first thin, glorious ribbon. You can tell, with roasts either, they yield like they've been waiting for you, or they fight like the devil. This one loved me back. I plated 4 slices on the warm platter, heaped potatoes round the sides, nestled parsnips like golden boomerangs, and fetched the jug of gravy. My hands worked with a lovely, old muscle memory, the way a violinist reaches for a phrase. I listened, house quiet, lane quiet, only the kitchen clock pretending it had something important to say. I set the platter on the table, center proud steam ribboning up like a blessing you could see, and then I sat. It is a strange thing to sit at a feast laid for others, the seat beside you empty, the seat across from you empty, the seats at either end empty. How quickly plates look like mirrors when no one is using them. My mind did that mean trick it does sometimes, replaying a memory you didn't ask for. Clara's voice at their place last month when I'd suggested we do Sundays regular again. It's 2025, Eleanor. We're not Victorians. Family doesn't have to be a weekly performance to be real. She'd smiled after, as if to soften it, then taken a sip of something green, in a glass that cost more than my kettle. I'd swallowed my reply and nodded, because what else do you do when someone wraps a slap in silk? 1:55 now. You'll say, it's too long. Perhaps, it was always too long, but there's a bit of me that was raised to wait, to keep a stiff upper lip, to make the best of it, to believe that if you lay a table with love, love will arrive. It's a superstition like any other. I went back to the kitchen and turned the oven to its lowest, slid the platter back under a loose cover, and told myself to give them 15 more minutes. I poured myself a small glass of wine, cheeky early for me, but I felt I'd earned the courage and took a sip that warmed like a friendly cardigan. On the mantel, the photograph of Richard and me from Brighton leaned in its frame. He was 17 there, shoulders newly broad, hair refusing to behave. We'd hired a daycare and watched the sea pretend to be brave. He'd said, "Mum, when I'm a proper grown, you won't have to lift a finger." And I'd told him, "I'll probably knit my fingers into something if I don't." He'd laughed and I'd believed him. Of course I did. Mothers are fools like that. We see the best self, and then we feed it until it's strong enough to forget we were the ones who brought the spoon. Somewhere down the lane, a dog barked. The radio offered the shipping forecast in that tone that makes you think all will be well if you just mind your cap and your coordinates. The daffodils had begun to bow their heads. I tucked a flyaway strand of hair behind my ear and straightened my back. It wouldn't do to meet them hunched if they came blowing in on apology. Traffic, they'd say. Lost track of time, they'd say. We grabbed something on the way, they'd say, handing me a tub of supermarket coleslaw as if it were a peace treaty. 2:00, my phone, face up and quiet, lit abruptly as if someone had tapped it with a wand. The screen glowed with Richard's name, that single word that holds most of my life, like a suitcase packed too tight. The glass caught my reflection small-lined, lips pressed thin in a way my mother warned me would make me look severe. I wiped my palms down my apron and picked it up. For a heartbeat longer than any clock allows, I didn't answer, just watched it ring, the way you watch a door you aren't sure you want to open. "Hello, love," I said, and in the half-second before his voice arrived, I could feel the whole table lean toward me, the roast listening, the potatoes, the Yorkshires with their proud little chins, the gravy holding its breath. "Mum," he began, "just that, Mum," and the word cracked like thin ice under a too-heavy step. I swallowed, the taste of rosemary bright on the back of my tongue. "Yes, Richard," I said, very gently, as if the dish itself could hear me and I didn't want to startle it. "And that is where I will leave you for this breath." The platter steaming under its light shroud, the daffodils bowing, the phone warm against my cheek, my heart doing that silly, hopeful tap in my chest it has done since the day they first put my son into my arms. Tap, 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 because hope is a rude thing. It shows up uninvited, even to a table set for disappointment. Mom, the way he said it, soft, careful, as if the word itself might cut him, told me everything before a sentence could finish dressing. A person can live a whole life inside that half-second between hello and the truth. I stood by the table with the phone warm against my cheek, the roast breathing quietly beneath its foil, the Yorkshires sitting proud as crowns, and tried to keep my voice steady enough to pour tea with. "Yes, Richard," he cleared his throat, a faint echo around him. "Kitchen tiles, maybe, or their hallway where shoes gather like small arguments. We're not going to make it today. For a heartbeat, the clock on the mantel went on strike. Oh, I said, because what else do you say when a Sunday you have carried like a hymn is dismissed, like weather? Are you all right, love? Are the children? They're fine, he said too quickly. It's just plans. Something's come up. I could hear it then, the sort of bustle that has nothing to do with getting out of the door, and everything to do with not trying. Paper bags rustling, cupboard doors chinning, Clara's voice somewhere further off, light and brisk as clean glass. I imagined her moving through their kitchen like a metronome. Tick, 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 measuring the day into something useful that didn't include me. What plans, darling? My words chose their slippers, polite and neat. I flipped the corner of the foil to let the roast breathe. Steam rose like a wish that had missed its chance. There was a pause, the sound of a hand over a microphone, then the tiny fugitive tap of the phone being moved. I heard a door close, the echo of a smaller room downstairs, loo or coat cupboard. When he spoke again, the worry was back in his voice. The boy who used to hide behind my skirt when fireworks surprised him. Look, Mom, Clara's not keen on Sundays at yours right now. Right now, I repeated softly, as if it were a spice to consider adding. Is she unwell? If she's tired, I can send plates along. I've plenty. Another pause. He is my son. I heard him choosing which bit of the truth he could bear. Before he found it, a lighter voice drifted through like perfume under a door. Richard, we're late. Tell her you'll call her tonight. And then, sharper, thinking she'd floated far enough away not to be heard, I am not spending my Sundays with someone stuck in the 70s. It's dreary. We're building our own family, not living in hers. I felt the words before I understood them, the way you feel a draft from a door you thought was shut. Something in me stood very still. Years of small slights lined up like condiments and took their place. Don't give them too much sugar. We don't do napkins anymore. We've gone plant-based this month. Please don't post pictures of the kids without checking. None of those were mortal wounds. Most were sensible enough. It wasn't the requests. It was the temperature they came in. As if my life, my table, my ways were an amateur production and she had a professional to be elsewhere with. Clara, I said gently into the phone, I can hear you, love. A startled silence. You could have balanced a spoon on it. Then her tone arrived, smiling and stiff, the way posh napkins arrive at weddings. Eleanor, didn't see you there. We've got a lunch with friends today. Kids, friends. It's important for them socially. A laugh, clipped. Do save yours for another day. Yes. Please don't go to any trouble. I looked at the table, at the polish that showed my face wavering, at the primroses that looked suddenly like a small, brave mistake, at the gravy keeping its promise under its skin. I kept my voice level, good as bone. No trouble at all. Oh, fabulous, she said, and in the background I heard Olivia ask something like, are we not going to and Clara say, too brightly, not today, darling, we're trying something new. Then the soft, sweet sound of a child's disappointment folded quickly away, like a shirt you don't want to look at in case you cry on it. Right, Richard murmured, we'll come next week, perhaps. I'll ring you later. His voice had that London glaze, the one people pick up after too much time on trains and in offices, where apologies are credit notes instead of cash. Of course, I said, kettle will be on. We said our goodbyes. The line clicked into its little cemetery of recent calls. The kitchen made the noise kitchens make when the point of them has been taken out, just the ticking clock and the trickle in the pipes and the scrape of a chair that no one moved. I set the phone down on the sideboard, face up as if it might change its mind and call back, and I stood a moment longer, listening for a sound that didn't arrive. If you have ever laid a table for four and watched it become a table for one, you will know the weather inside a body can change faster than England's sky. The roast under the foil shifted, a soft settling. Heat began to drift out sideways, the way hope does when it realizes it has been stood up. The Yorkshires, stubborn little show-offs, still looked magnificent, and something about their cheerful architecture made tears press hot into my eyes. I went to the sink, because that is what English women do when feelings try to get noisy. We run the tap, we find a cloth, we methodically wipe an already clean surface, until the impulse to scream thinks better of itself and has a sit-down. I plated a single meal, just to prove I hadn't wasted my day on, carried it to my place, the one with the window. Outside, Mrs. Hart was bringing in the washing because clouds had gathered their skirts. The lane looked pleased with itself for managing to be quiet. I sat, The knife in my hand gleamed as if it might have advice. I sliced into the beef. It surrendered like a gentleman. I put a little brown river over it and lifted the fork. You know, it tasted exactly as a perfect roast ought to taste. It tasted like competence, like the past behaving itself. It tasted of 1,000 Sundays when men in wool jumpers pressed their knees under tables and children swung their feet and women carried rooms on their backs. But as I chewed, the flavor moved sideways and became something else. The taste of being unnecessary in the sitting room. The radio murmured about traffic on the M4 and a lost dog reunited with its owner, and I thought, good, something is finding its way home today. I looked down the table at the 3 plates that hadn't been used. The cutlery reflected nothing but ceiling. Well, I said, and my voice surprised me by being steady, I suppose that's that. I stood. I laid the carving knife back in its box. I poured gravy back into the pan. I turned the oven down to the smallest whisper and slid the platter in to be gently forgotten. The house didn't know what to do with me then. I wandered it like I might be useful somewhere. In the hallway, a coat hook swung a little where a small school bag should have been. In the spare room, the box of wooden trains waited loyally in case James came to build a station. On my dressing table, a small bottle of perfume. I only wear when I want to. Pretend I am someone else looked at me with its black lid like a remark it decided not to make. I went back to the kitchen and made a cup of tea far stronger than the Queen would have approved, and stood with both hands round it until the sting in my chest calmed down enough to let breath in properly. When I could think again, what came wasn't anger. It was clarity, the sort of cold that brings everything into focus. She's not keen on Sundays at yours, he'd said. Keen as if I were a hobby, to be put down for a while, as if I were a subscription, you cancel and then maybe start again if there's a free month. I am not daft. I know I'm not fashionable. I still prefer proper letters to texts and recipes written on the back of envelopes to scrolling through. Someone called at Kitchen Witch 3 for telling me to use almond milk and hope. I like tables laid with effort. I like the way food makes people kinda. None of that is the 70s. It's civilization. I washed the cup. I wiped the ring the cup had left. I dried my hands on the dish towel patterned with small strawberries that Olivia had chosen in the market last summer. And then, because there was no one here to perform for, I let my face fall open with the sort of grief you're taught to do privately. It didn't last long. There is a point in tears where the body decides they are not going to change the forecast, and it sends them home. I went to my desk. It's near the window that looks onto the lane. A narrow thing with 3 drawers that stick when it rains. In the top drawer, under rubber bands and a bequest of candles that smell faintly of apples. I keep paper thick enough to be worth taking seriously. I took out a sheet, the good pen, and I wrote 4 words at the top, not knowing yet what they meant. The dish left cold. I looked at them until they looked back. A half smile got loose. All right then, I said to nobody, and to my mother, and to the girl I used to be who once stood in a village hall serving sausage rolls, and thinking, one day I will run a whole table my way. If that's how it is, what is it they say? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Rubbish. Hell hath no fury like a woman overlooked. Scorned is loud. Overlooked is efficient. I put on my coat, the navy one with the good buttons, and my walking shoes. I turned off the oven, slid the roast onto a cool rack, tucked the Yorkshires into a tin, and let the lid rest cockeyed so they wouldn't sulk. And then I put the gravy into a jar with a lid that seals like an oath. I covered the crumble. I left the table, as it was, like a stage set between shows. Then I took the keys from the little bowl by the door, the one Richard made in year 8. Lopsided as a drunk, Heluan stepped into the lane. The air had sharpened. England had decided to drizzle. I tucked my chin down and took the path that cuts behind the allotments, past the low wall where teenagers pretend not to be seen, to the old community hollow brick rectangle with a roof like a tired hat. The wooden notice board out front offered Pilates on Tuesdays, toddler group on Thursdays, and a poster for the spring fete, where Mr. Thompson always wins the Victoria Sponge by a suspicious margin. I pushed the door. It gave, then stuck, then gave again, as if it, too, had mixed feelings. Inside smelled of floor polish, tea, damp coats, and memory. You could stage a whole country in that scent. There were 3 people standing near the hatch, to the kitchen discussing whether the urn was on the blink again. Mr. Thompson, tweed cap in hand as if it were a small animal he was comforting. Pauline from the post office in a jumper the color of boiled sweets. And a tall woman I recognized vaguely from the GP's surgery, all cardigans and kindness. They all turned when they saw me in the doorway with my hair escaping its pins, and rain on my shoulders, and my expression doing something between brave and ridiculous. "Ellie," said Mr. Thompson, "the way people say your name when they are glad you're the person who has arrived. You all right, Doc?" "Not especially," I said, and then, because English is a trickster, I smiled, "but I've brought lunch." They laughed because that is the only right thing to do when a sentence like that turns up dripping and determined. I lifted the tin a fraction to show the Yorkshires haloed in their own smugness. "I made too much," I lied. "Sit yourselves down and be useful." Pauline clapped, bless her heart. "Oh, you're an angel." "Hardly," I said. And something in my voice was a match, more of a fed-up saint. We set out 6 mismatched plates. I warmed the roast, with a kind touch in the hall's elderly oven, while the tall woman, Jane, that was it, made tea strong enough to stand a spoon in. I carved. The knife sang like it knew an audience. I poured the gravy and it folded itself round the meat, glossy and generous. Pauline made the noise British. Women make it food that looks right somewhere between a hum and an approval. Mr. Thompson put his cap back on because happiness makes him forget what he's doing. We ate. They told me about the urn and the roof leak and the toddler group's new rule about raisins. I told them absolutely nothing about my phone call or the plates waiting under cooling air. I told them about the jam and the gravy and the oven shelf that only behaves if you ask it twice. They ate with the sort of gratitude that gives you your appetite back. When Pauline lifted her fork and said, "This is the best roast this hall has seen since before the millennium," I felt something shift in my chest like furniture finding its proper place. "Come on then," said Mr. Thompson when seconds were negotiated and thirds were looked at with polite greed. "Why aren't we doing this regular? There's that gap on Sundays between church and the pub, where people go home to a microwave and pretend it's dinner. We could put on a spread, nothing fancy, donation tin, bit of chat. You know what folks are, like half the time, they only need a plate and a reason." Pauline nodded so hard her earrings worried about it. "We could call it Sunday something. Sunday supper. No, that's American. Sunday lunch together. Oh, I like that. Together. Together," I said, tasting the word. It sat warm in the mouth, and we keep the rules simple. No sermons, no fussing, proper gravy, pudding if someone's brought cream. We'll put the kettle on for anyone who looks like they might bolt. Jean smiled the smile of women who have built empires out of trestle tables. "You'll run it, then." I opened my mouth to say, "Oh no, I've enough on," and what came out surprised me by being the truth. "Yes," I said, "I will." I walked home in the sort of rain that means business. The lane shone like it had been polished for an inspection. My house looked at me with its small square eyes and said, "Well, I let myself in." The table was still a portrait. I cleared it without ceremony. Leftovers into containers, Yorkshires into tins, gravy cooled and into the fridge. I portioned 2 plates and wrapped them, wrote names on sticky notes, and walked them down to Mrs. Hart and to Mr. Cooper at the end, who hasn't been well since Christmas. "We had too much," I said again. White lies are, if you ask me, community service. Back inside, I washed and dried and put away. I unpinned my hair and gave it a brisk talking to. Then, I sat at the desk and pulled my thick paper towards me again. Under the dish left cold I wrote, in a hand that meant business, "Sunday lunch together launch next week, 12 until 2. Bring what you can, pay what you can, come as you are." And beneath that, menu, roast, potatoes, proper veg pudding, tea on tap, volunteers 3. I underlined proper veg because I will not preside over a table that calls cucumber salad a vegetable. When there are roots in the ground wanting glory, I made 3 copies. I walked them to the notice board at the hall, to the window of the chemist where they post everything from lost cats to yoga, and to the church porch, pinning them where the eyes go when people are pretending not to read the banns. Then I came home and sat at the table I had set for a family that did not come, and I wrote a different kind of note. It wasn't a letter to be posted. It wasn't even a letter to be read aloud. It was a spell of sorts, the kind we cast when we are done being the soft place everyone falls on. "Dear Richard," I wrote, and paused to let the name stop fizzing. "The dish you left cold warmed 3 others today, and no one cared whether the cutlery matched. I will not be cross with you on the telephone, and I will not beg for your time, but here is what I will do. I will feed this village until it remembers itself, and if you are hungry for what you threw away, you will find me where the queue is, not waiting at my window. Love, Mum." I didn't post it. It wasn't for the post. Some things are for the bones. Evening rolled up like an old rug. The light went the color of weak tea. I put the radio on low. I made myself a sandwich I didn't want. I washed the roasting tin with hands that had other work to do and let them get on with it. When the phone rang at 8, as promised, I let it ring twice before I picked up. "How was your day?" he asked, soft again. "The way you speak to a sleeping cat. You need to move." "Busy," I said. "Yours?" "Fine. We went to a thing at the gallery and then for lunch. The kids had." He stopped. He would have said burgers and then remembered my roast and thought better. "They had a lovely time." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it in the way you mean it when you have refused to be eaten alive by envy. "We'll come next Sunday," he said quickly, like throwing a rope. "That's kind of you," I said. "There's something you should know. Next Sunday I'm at the hall. Sunday lunch together, we're calling it. I'll be cooking for whoever turns up." A small silence, the sort that has opinions. "At the hall," he repeated, as if halls were for committees and raffles and not for correcting the temperature of a life. "Yes, you're very welcome, of course. Hugh starts at 12. "Mum," he said, with the particular warning a son gives when his mother stops doing what is convenient for his life. Clara thinks he groped for a gentler noun than the one I'd already heard. She thinks it's old-fashioned. All this. I smiled and he could hear it down the line, and it made something in his voice wobble. "Old-fashioned," I said. "Well then, considered me vintage." Before he could answer, I added, "Give my love to the children. Tell Olivia the fairy cakes won't bake themselves on Saturday, and tell James I found the missing piece of track." After we hung up, I took out my mother's tablecloth, the white with the blue hem, and I ironed it smooth for next week. I went through my recipe cards and chose the ones that had grease on them, because grease is a kind of annotation you can trust. I made a shopping list that the budget and I would quarrel about later. I put the kettle on. When it clicked, I poured, and I watched the tea bloom the way things do when hot honesty meets plain water. That night, sleep came like a stray cat, reluctant, then suddenly curled at my feet, warm and present. I dreamt of long tables and the sound people make when they haven't eaten properly for a while, and then remember how I dreamt of Clara looking through the hall's open door and not choosing to come in. I dreamt of Richard standing at the back, hands in pockets, trying to decide whether pride or hunger was the heavier pocket. When I woke in the gray slip of morning, it felt less like a dream than a rehearsal. All week the village did its village thing. News traveled by nods and through the lattice of who knew whom. At the butcher's, Mr. Webb thumped a palm on the counter and said, "Heard you're doing a spread, Ellie. I'll see you right on the beef." At the bakery, May tucked an extra loaf into my bag with a conspirator's wink. At the chemist, Pauline taped my poster right at eye level, not down near the hay fever tablets where things go to be ignored. Even the vicar, who likes my lemon drizzle in a way that is not theological, stopped me outside and said, "Bless you for the idea," which I took to mean, do it properly. On Friday, Olivia rang from the landliner. Sound so rare it felt ceremonial. "Gran, my love, Mom says we're busy Sunday," she said in the whisper of a girl carving out a corner of the world. "But Dad said, maybe we can come for a bit. Will there be gravy?" "There will be gravy," I said, my throat doing that old ache and that new pride at the same time. "And fairy cakes, Saturday, if you can sneak out," she giggled. "I'll try. Tell James I've a compass for him, for adventures." "Oh," she said, and the word flew round my kitchen like a small bird that knew its own way out. "Okay, I love you." "I love you more," I said, which is a game we play and a covenant we mean. On Saturday I baked until the house smelled like promises. On Sunday I woke before the light and put the roast in as if laying a cornerstone. I wore the navy dress that makes me look like I know what I'm doing, and my mother's brooch that pretends to be a leaf. I walked to the hall with my head up and my heart doing the careful trot it does when it is excited and scared, and ready all at once. When I opened the hall door, 3 people were already waiting: Mr. Cooper with his cap, a young mum with a prom, and a teenage boy I recognized from the bus stop who eats his breakfast from a packet. "Tea first," I said, "because it is practically law, and you can sit where you like, because power is a chair that isn't assigned." The urn, bless it, behaved. By 12:30 the hall was busy with the low, gorgeous noise of people who have decided to be human to one another for an hour. I carved, Pauline ladled, Jean ran plates like an athlete. Mr. Thompson managed a queue with the benevolent tyranny of a man, who once was head boy for a reason. The roast was right. The potatoes had the manners of potatoes raised by a grandmother. The gravy held itself like a gentleman, and the faces the faces did that softening they do when something hits the spot that hunger opens in you, which isn't in your belly. People ate, and then they spoke. I've not had proper roast since Mum died. My cooker's on the blink. I thought I didn't like parsnips, turns out I've just never had them done like this. Laughter shined the tables. A prom squeaked. Someone called for seconds in a voice that still knew how to ask. At 5-1 the door opened again. I didn't look up straight away because there were plates and a jug, and a boy asking if he could have just one more potato please. Then the air shifted. It does that when you own walk in. I lifted my head. Richard stood just inside the door, hands in pockets, hair a bit wild with wind, useless as always without a list. Behind him, Olivia peered round his arm with the seriousness of a child entering a story. James bounced once on his toes and tried to pretend he hadn't. There was a rectangle of absence where Clara might have been. He took a second to take the scene in the trestles, the plates, the cue, the donation tin with a few notes gone shy under coins. His face did several things at once. Pride, surprise, relief, defensiveness. He stepped forward. Mum, he began, and stopped because Mr. Thompson thrust a plate into his hands and said, "You can be helpful, lad. Meat there, spuds at your elbow. Don't be stingy." Richard blinked, then smiled the smile he had when he was 6, and I'd handed him the tongs and said, "You're on sausages." He came behind the table next to me and I placed the carving knife in his hand. "Thin," I murmured, "not stingy." He nodded like a soldier receiving orders. He finally understood. Olivia slid under the hatch with the practice of children who refuse to be kept from where the warmth is made. "Gravy?" she asked wide-eyed, and when I nodded she lifted the jug with 2 hands, reverent as a chalice. James stationed himself at the peas, with the solemn duty of an altar boy. We became, in the space of a minute, what we had been built for, and what we had not done in too long. A family serving other people, before ourselves, and finding ourselves in the process. As for Claire, there would be time for that conversation. When the hall had emptied and the urn had done its last valiant splutter, and the chairs were stacking themselves in their heads, time for the truth to be laid out like cutlery, and picked up with intention. Not today. Today I had the thing I'd made out of the dish, left cold, a room full of warmed faces. A son, learning the muscle memory of generosity again. Grandchildren who would remember this day as something their bodies could rely on. And a door open, should anyone else find themselves hungry for it. When the rush lulled, Richard leaned close, the way he did when he was small, and wanted to tell me he'd broken something and hoped I'd say the magic words, "We can fix it." "Mum," he said, and the word was not careful now, it was bare. "I'm sorry." I looked at him, at the boy I'd walked through blizzards for, at the man who had let the weather of a marriage decide his Sundays. I touched the back of his hand where a faint burn had already risen from the heat of the lamp. "Put the kettle on," I said, which, if you're English, you know is what we say when a heart is about to be seen to. Outside, the sky changed its mind again, and a sliver of sun laid itself like a blessing on the hall's steps. Inside, the queue shortened. The donation tin felt heavier. Pauline declared the crumble a triumph, and there was a chorus of yeses, and me welly did what I do. I kept the knives talking. I kept the gravy honest. I kept time with a meal until people felt like people again. You asked for the truth, I learned. Here it is, love. Sometimes the family you cook for isn't the family you birthed. Sometimes the table you lay is the one strangers sit at and leave as neighbors. And sometimes the revenge life offers a woman like me is simply this: do the thing you were told was old-fashioned, so well that the modern world cues for a taste and calls it new. I went home that evening, with my dress smelling of roast and rain, and the sort of tiredness that deserves a chair. The house did not feel empty when I opened the door. It felt like a place to set my bag down. On the sideboard, my phone sat face up and patient. A message blinked, from Clara. "Hope it all went well." I stared at the words, at the hope that was not hope at all, and felt that useful, efficient cold return just enough to keep me standing. I typed back, "It did. We start again next week. You're welcome to come. Q starts at 12. Then I put the phone face down, because I prefer the sound of my own kettle to the hum of a device that doesn't know how to take no for the answer it is. I washed my hands. I laid a single plate. I put on the radio, and I ate the last Yorkshire, not because no one else wanted it, but because I did. Outside, The daffodils in the jug bowed and then lifted their heads again, stubborn little trumpets, and I thought, yes, me too. Asterisk, they say revenge is best served cold. But in my kitchen, revenge came plated hot, with potatoes crisp and gravy deep enough to drown regret. The following Sunday, the community hall was buzzing again. Laughter floated under the rafters, steam rose from trays of roast, and children ran between tables with cheeks pink from the cold outside. The donation tin clinked with coins and folded notes. Every seat was filled, and every mouth was busy, not just with food but with stories of loneliness eased, of hunger softened, of belonging returned. I stood at the center, carving knife in hand, my apron dotted with flour and pride. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for love to arrive at my table. I was giving it where it was welcomed. And then the door opened. Richard stepped in, his tie loosened, face drawn. Behind him, Olivia and James pressed close, wide-eyed at the warmth and noise inside. Clara wasn't with them. Perhaps she hadn't wanted to come. Perhaps she thought it beneath her. Perhaps she thought I would still be waiting at home with plates cooling like old apologies. But I was here, and I was not waiting. Richard hesitated, scanning the crowded hall. He had always been tall, but here he seemed smaller, a boy again. Uncertain if he belonged. Olivia tugged his sleeve. James whispered, "It smells amazing." I caught his eye. I didn't smile, not fully, but I nodded once, a permission and a challenge in the same breath. Mr. Thompson bustled forward and clapped Richard on the back. "Grab a plate, lad. Don't just stand there gawping. Your mum's feeding the whole village today." The whole hall turned to see, and Richard, red-cheeked, moved forward. He lined up like everyone else, took a plate like everyone else, and when he reached me, carving knife poised, his voice cracked just enough for me to hear what pride tried to hide. "Mum, I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked, and for a heartbeat I saw the 6-year-old who once called my gravy the Brown River. I laid 2 generous slices of beef on his plate. "Don't be stingy with the potatoes," I murmured, "and make sure the kids get Yorkshire first." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something to build on if he chose to. Olivia beamed as I handed her a pudding, whispering, "Gran's cooking is the best." James grinned, crumbs already on his chin. For them, there was no question, no hesitation. They knew exactly where they belonged. As the afternoon wound down, Richard lingered while others left. He helped stack chairs, wiped tables, and finally came to me as I washed up by the urn. His voice was low, careful. "Clara, she doesn't understand. She thinks tradition is old, controlling." I dried my hands on a towel and met his eyes. "And what do you think, Richard?" "Because I'm done waiting for someone else to decide whether I matter." He flinched at that, but he didn't look away. "I think I've forgotten what matters, and I don't want the kids to forget to." I nodded, but I gave him no easy comfort. Not yet. Some lessons, like Yorkshire puddings, must rise in their own time. That evening, when I returned home, I found my house different, not because anything had changed, dishes still drying, flowers still bowing in their jug, but because I was no longer its prisoner. It was my refuge, my place to rest after feeding the world, not a cell where I waited to be chosen. I sat at my desk, pulled out my thick paper, and wrote another note. This one I sealed in an envelope with Richard's name on it. "The dish you left cold has warmed an entire village. If you want a seat at my table now, you'll have to stand in line like everyone else, because, Richard, I am no one's leftover." I tucked it into my handbag. He would get it when he needed to. As night fell, I made myself a simple plate, a slice of roast, 2 potatoes, a bit of crumble. I poured a glass of wine and raised it toward the empty chair across from me, where John would have sat. "Here's to you, love," I whispered. They thought I was old-fashioned, but turns out, I was just timeless. And I smiled, not bitter but bright, because I knew this truth now. The sweetest revenge isn't cruelty, it's dignity. It's refusing to be forgotten. It's serving life back, dish by dish, until those who overlooked you realize too late that they should have cherished every bite. So I ask you, listening to me now, if the ones you loved most treated your devotion like a plate left to cool, what would you do? Would you keep waiting at the window? Or would you carry your dish into the world and let strangers taste what your own blood refused? As for me, I chose the second, and I'll tell you this: nothing, not even a cold Sunday roast, ever tasted sweeter.